Never forget you, O Jerusalem. Let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. We have made a lot of steps. I feel that we'll finish up tonight. We are at a place tonight where people from all over the world travel to be in this spot. We'll look at several things here. We finished last week. We were in the dungeon or base of Caiaphas' home where Jesus spent his last night. We know that the evening before, after the Passover meal was shared with the disciples, the Lord's Supper was instituted, and then sometime about dusk, the trip was made from the upper room in Jerusalem over to Gethsemane. It's not a quick walk. Remember, the Kidron Valley is there, and it's a relatively deep valley. It takes some effort. Along about midnight, the Sanhedrin and the soldiers came with Judas to arrest Jesus. Well, he had ample time an opportunity to do a lot of different things at that moment. Because probably for a couple of hours, he watched as those lights came out of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley, and over to Gethsemane, there on the Mount of Olives, to arrest him. And we know what he did. He was there in prayer. He was there in agony. He knew what was about to happen. Yet he knew it was God's plan. As he was brought back to this place here, if he was, Judas, we know how he told the soldiers. He kissed the one that the soldiers were to arrest. We know that Christ told him to get that done. Actually called him friend. And as Jesus was arrested, he was brought back across that Kidron Valley sometime after midnight, sometime prior to 3 a.m. He was brought to Caiaphas' house, and he was met by the Sanhedrin there. Annas, Caiaphas' father-in-law, and Caiaphas was there. And the brutality starts. We know that he was spat upon. He was beaten with their fist. He was humiliated in any and every way that they could possibly do that. Now, you can see folks here going down into the bottom of this. I wish I had a picture of it straight down, because it's basically an 8-foot by 12-foot rock room that you can look straight up and you can see a hole. This is looking down 2 holes on the side of it. But of course, in the night that Jesus spent there, this stairway was not there. He was lowered down from Caiaphas' house down into there. And that's where he spent his night. And sometime before daylight or about daylight, they got him out, and we know that they headed into Jerusalem. There's 2 or 3 things that I want to test your memory. I'd like for you to remember what it looked like when we showed the pictures of the Garden of Gethsemane. the church of many nations there that represented the spot. The church and I can't Flevit, Dominus Flevit, which means Jesus weeps, was right there with it. Also, remember the hidden gate where we had our worship service. We was talking about it's where Pilate came out and said, "Behold the man." The Via Dolorosa, all of the placards that we saw going down through the main part of town, the path that Jesus was led carrying his cross or cross member to Golgotha. And then remember the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We're going to finish tonight in the Garden Tomb. Both of these tombs, both of these locations were in rock quarries north of Jerusalem, just outside the city wall. Both of these places were on a road well traveled, so anyone that is to be crucified and made an example of is exhibited, and I mean exhibited right here on the road. So anybody coming in or anyone leaving the city by this way will see them. You know, a lot of these people historically, when you start reading, they may hang there 4 to 6 days before they die. Now, Christ took a beating. Jesus took a beating that a normal man probably would not be able to withstand. He would have died from the torture that he had before he ever got to the cross. And then we'll look at those moments on the cross. But if you'll remember those things, the Church of the Sepulchre is there with a magnificent church built over the spot that they call Golgotha. And there is the remains, or what's left of a tomb there, that some think that Jesus was Jesus' tomb. When I was there, I didn't think so because of all of the pomp and circumstance. But since I've been back, you know, we've studied more and looked at more at what we did and had time to reflect. It's another part of idolatry. It makes me think, well, maybe this was the place. And they have made a place and they are worshiping. I told you about folks that would stand in line for hours to kiss a stone, to bow on their hands and knees and kiss a stone that they've been told is a stone that the Christ laid on. When we went to the Garden Tomb, and we'll show a picture of as close as I could get to what represents that skull. We've got a picture, one of the books turned to a picture that represents it a little better. But I just couldn't get, from the angle I was with the construction that was going on, I could not get a picture of that skull. But I think there's a representation of the rock where you could see it might be, you could see that skull. But it's one of those places where the quiet is deafening. It's one of those places that is, if you hear a sound, more likely than not, it may be a bird. It's part of nature. It's a place, I know we sang there, and we heard other people singing there. So a whole lot quieter place, and we've got some good pictures of it. That will get started. You remember the song that we sang as we were in the bottom of this dungeon, he could have called 10,000 angels.
Which I always heard. Was he chained up
There are places anywhere that, and I'll try not to walk in front of you. Anywhere that you see a shaped corner like that, they will normally put a couple of holes there and say there, where they can run chains or ropes or whatever through, so they can have someone tied up where they can't get down. This is out in the courtyard outside of Caiaphas' house. Some of you may know this gentleman here, Buddy Martin. He's a retired preacher down at San Marcos. I think he was the preacher that John Moore worked under before he became a full-time preacher. He was presenting a sermon, a devo, if you will, while we were there. This is located in what I would call the city of David. If looking back this way from that spot, you would see Jerusalem, see the south wall. All of these buildings, you can see where it was built here. Just took this picture, you can see the bedrock here. And of course, all down in that dungeon is all bedrock, hand carved out. And these ancient steps that were going up to this level here before this nice building was ever put in place. A beautiful building that they built on top of Caiaphas' house. Yeah, we'll get to that here in just get to it here in just a little bit. It's and anytime if you've got something to add, please do. If you have a question, ask Tim. He'd be glad to answer. Looking out over this courtyard, the rail there, of course you can see diggings there, mikvahs, cleansing pools. This is depicting Peter. You know, as we're not going to have time to read all of the scripture I'd like to read, but as they started back, as they arrested Jesus, do you remember what the disciples did? They abandoned him. Now, Peter followed along at a distance, and he even was brave enough to come into this area and sit with some of the officers and people there while the Sanhedrin was trying to convince Caiaphas to kill Jesus. And if you remember, a young lady came up to Peter and said, aren't you one of his disciples? And of course, what did Peter say? I never knew him. Another young lady comes up. Same thing. No, I never knew him. A third group comes up and says, you've got to be one of his disciples because of the way you talk. And he says, he cursed. I never knew him. And then what happened? See the rooster on top of the column there? A very solemn place. Down this walkway leaving Caiaphas' house, you actually come to some ancient steps from that first century that goes across the Kidron Valley and over to the Mount of Olives. And this is a path that after the Passover meal with the disciples, that they went down, used to go across there, and then it's also the path after his arrest. They came back up to Caiaphas' house. Real close, just next to Caiaphas' house, I'm going to look here. Gallicantu Church. This area is known as Gallicantu. And some of them might help me. I can't remember exactly what that means. I'm sure it has a meaning. Off the top of my head, I'm not pulling it. Gallicantu Church, another beautiful building. And it's right there close to Caiaphas, right there next to Caiaphas' house. This is the Zion Gate. We actually got on the bus and came back to Zion Gate, and we're headed to the upper room, or the location of the upper room. And I want you to look at the pock marks. This is something I guess you just have to get used to. These are bullet wounds. 1948, there was a war with Jordan, and this was the Jordanians firing at them. And they were able to, the Jordanians took it, kicked the Jews out. They were able to fight their way back in, but they couldn't hold on to it and was forced out again. And then in 1967, of course, we had the 6-day war with Syria, and more gunshots here at Zion. And I did not notice any other gates. While this one was shot up more, I didn't notice any other gates with bullet holes in it like the Zion Gate had. Of course, this is considered to be in the Mount Zion area. This building here, when we go back, is actually built on top of what was considered to be the upper room where Christ instituted the Lord's Supper. This is what's built in that spot now. Of course, it's a beautiful old building with great acoustics and everything. But when you look at the floor, it's like a lot of other places. You look at the floor and you can tell what's old and what's not. When you see these stones like this, very rough stones, and they'll be shiny from footwear, that'll be some of your areas that they're using stones from that first century. We're back to the Zion Gate, and we are fixing to get back on the bus, and we're going to head to the Garden Tomb. John 19, verse 41 says, "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb where no one had ever been laid." This is the stone. If I could have got to the area, I told you that it was a bus parking lot around that, but that skull in the side of that mountain is right on this point over here, just off of this picture. But I can't remember now. I think it was back. It's been 30 or 40 years ago. They had enough of an earthquake that the nose part of it fell off, but you can still see the eyes, and from a distance it still looks like a skull. Right. Yeah, you can see it's actually a picture of when they were excavating this whole area. In this garden, this is a wine press. John 19, verses 40 and 42, it says, "Then Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby." And remember, they're having to do all this before dusk, before sundown, because their holiday, their day of preparation starts after dusk. Mark 16:6, "Do not be afraid. You come seeking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, but he is not here, for he is risen." Now, this is the tomb. How many? What, they let 4 people in at a time? 3? Yeah, they wouldn't give anyone any longer. I don't know if that was for crowds. I don't know what those rules came from, but this doorway here, number one, is taller probably than it was. It's been cleaned out, and if you'll notice, this area here had caved in, so those blocks were added there. But the holes you see up higher than the door and above this reconstruction area, those are vents. That's to let the odor off from the body that's been buried in there. And I wish I would have asked about this level, because I know this curb area here, this looks like, or I felt like I was on rock. And that, in other words, that was not a poured curb, but a chiseled curb out of this stone, out of this bedrock. So I'm assuming, of course, they had a replica of a round stone that could be rolled in front of this tomb door, but I'm assuming that's what they would do. They put that in there and then roll it so it couldn't be slid out. It had to roll in basically there was a track area between this curb and the face of that tomb. If you look closely right here, you'll see a symbol of the cross from the Crusader age that's chiseled in. This is just outside the building, right down here on this end, just on the left-hand side of this gentleman, about face high on that wall. And inside the tomb, you'll see it again in I know that's not paint. That's probably a paint made. Again, the Crusader cross. But this tomb had three places for actual bodies to lay. This, historically, or in their beliefs, this is where Jesus lay, in the very back end of the tomb. And of course there would be the stone, for instance, that they use at Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a stone that would lay on top of this area here on a ledge, and then this would be an open area below it. Those stones were not in this tomb, but that's the stone that everybody stands in line to get down on their hands and knees and kiss at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Again, just this lady is probably 5'5", maybe, so you can see how tall the doorway is there, but they told us that they were much shorter than that. It would be something that you may not have to get down on your hands and knees and crawl, but you'd have to really get low to get in them. Okay. Marcia, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and these last three. This is a picture. We got on the bus. We left the garden tomb. Before we left the garden tomb, let me back up just a second. Before we left this garden, which is a beautiful place, I wish I could show you 40 pictures that could be taken in there, and every one of them you would ooh and ah over. Just a beautiful place. But there was a brush arbor in there. There were several locations where you could get, and we sang. This is a place where we sang the Old Rugged Cross, and it was just a very inspiring, but a very emotional area. Up from the grave he arose. Yeah, we did sing that too. I forgot. Yeah. We got on a bus and we went around to, I know I'll butcher this, Kiryat Jearim. It's around a place called Abu Ghosh, and this is an Arab town that you're seeing down here. We're up in the parking lot of, it's actually where we went was a convent, and then about 6 miles to the, let's see, what would that be? Is west or southwest of Abu Ghosh is Jerusalem. You can see the city of Jerusalem in the background there, up here. The reason we went there, and again now it's a convent. Go to the next picture. You can see the front end with the big standing monument there. It's now a convent, but it's where the Ark of the Covenant was for 20 years. It was stored on this location. Now they are in the middle. It was stolen by the Palestinians, but they are in the middle of a renovation here. We can see with the last picture, of course, a beautiful building. I'm sure it didn't look anything like this then, but this is the location that it's built on. And again, this is a convent now. But we have, in our visit here, we started looking at the Ark of the Covenant and what all happened to it through the years. And I know it made me think of some of the stuff we talked about yesterday afternoon a little bit. Some of the things that happened, some of the things that people had to endure that were in care of it, and then some people were blessed when they were in care of it. The bottom line is, if we obey God, things go a whole lot better, don't they? Things certainly go a whole lot better. Okay, Marcy. Does anyone have anything to add or any questions